Hello and welcome to my first review. Today we are going to review the RetroDuo system, which is an NES and Super NES clone. Today on this episode of the Video Game Chronicles. Welcome to the Video Game Chronicles. This is going to be a special shout out to Gamester81 because this is more of an influential video in a way, since I have been watching his videos. It's going to be like his videos in a way, because what I'm going to review for this video is, and it's going to be my first review ever, hopefully there'll be more soon, I'm going to be reviewing the RetroDuo system. This originally came out in 2008 by Retrobit, and I think there was another company called Enix Incorporated, and I think they published it. But this is by Retrobit, and this is the 3.0 version of the RetroDuo. And of course this plays NES and Super NES games, and this is considered to be one of the best NES and Super Nintendo clones on the market right now. It's around 50 or 60 bucks, I think, and it is widely available. You can either buy it either on Amazon or a online site, and you can probably find this in video game stores as well, because I actually won this at a raffle back in March, and I'm here to review it. So let's get on with the review and enjoy, everybody. Now this of course is the RetroDuo box, and of course it says 3.0 on it. This is the third version of the box, and they slightly upgraded the logo for the RetroDuo. That wasn't the original logo for the RetroDuo. Of course, it was released by Retrobit, and it's a 16-bit and 8-bit twin video game system. It'll play your NES and Super NES games, and as you can see, mine is the black with red colored doors on it, plus the power switch and reset are red as well. So that's what the controller looks like for the RetroDuo. And it says if you buy this can be compatible with Genesis games as well. So if you buy the RetroGen adapter. Okay, that's the front of the box. We're going to look at the back of the box, which is upside down until you flip it. And of course, there are different regions of languages telling you about the RetroDuo. Of course, I speak English, so we're going to read this. Save space, reinforced cartridge doors, slide-proof button support. Oh, bottom support, never mind. Sorry about that, folks. I screwed up there. Compatible with most Japanese titles. So that means you can play Famicom games, Super Famicom games, I should say. Famicom games you have to use a converter for. Compatible with the original 16-bit controllers. Sorry about that, folks. I just heard something and thought it was something that dropped on the floor. Sorry. That's okay. Compatible with the original 16-bit controllers, sleeker design, lighter in weight. I agree with that completely, because if you ever have felt the RetroDuo system, it is very light. Package includes RetroDuo system, 2 controllers, AV/S-video cable, AC adapter, and instructional manual. And here's what the rest of the back of the box looks like. This tells you about the system. It is a family clone, just to tell you, just in case you didn't know. And of course, this is the rest of the back. Made in China, designed in the USA. So, now, I'm going to show you what the RetroDuo actually looks like up close, and I'm going to show you the controllers and everything else. So, oh, by the way, another cool thing about the RetroDuo system box is the fact that it has a handle, so you can actually carry your RetroDuo system just by holding this, which is pretty cool. Now we're going to show you the RetroDuo system along with its accessories. So this is the RetroDuo system, and it's very small and sleek in design and very lightweight. You can lift this up with no effort whatsoever. It's probably about a pound. It probably weighs about a pound, I'm not sure. And of course, you got your power right there. You can lift that up for your 8-bit system, and down for your 16-bit system, which of course is the Super NES, and of course the 8-bit is the NES. You got your reset button right there, your indicator lights telling you which system is on, and you got players 1 and 2. Of course, these are Super Nintendo connections, which means you can only play using the came with RetroDuo controllers or your Super Nintendo controllers, which I mostly use. And it definitely works much better than the RetroDuo controllers, even though these are not bad. They're just cheaply made though, I think, but they do work. So whatever controller you're using, it's fine. Of course, you got your Super Nintendo slot right there. You got your NES slot right there. Of course. You got your vents on each side. They're both the same. And of course, we're going to look at the back here. You got your composite video and audio. You got your S-video. And you got your DC adapter connector. And there is nothing on the bottom. So that's pretty much it for that. And of course, you can either play Super Nintendo games like so. You can plug in a Super Nintendo game, or you can put in an NES game like so. Now the RetroDuo controllers are, like I said, cheaply made, but they do work. They do work though. But I do recommend the Super Nintendo controller. The instruction manual, which you'll need if you don't know how to hook up a RetroDuo. It comes in different languages. You also got your AV cables along with S-video and your power plug. And that's pretty much all that came with the RetroDuo. Now the pin connectors are tight, so you're going to have to not only push in a game, but you're going to have to pull it out with some force. Otherwise, you're not going to get the game out right away, or get the game in at all. And that's pretty much all I got to tell you. Now, let's check out some gameplay. Now, before we get to some gameplay, I just want to tell you a little bit more about the controller. It is cheaply made, but RetroDuo controller works just fine. Very responsive. And I want to tell you something that when you're playing NES games, the Y button is the B button's the A. just in case you didn't know or never seen a RetroDuo review before. I just wanted to let you in on that. And it does feel comfortable, the RetroDuo controller. And what's pretty cool about this is when you're playing this with an NES game, you can actually do some glitches, some weird glitches, just like with the game handler controller, which I'm going to do in another review. But that won't be for a little while until I can actually film it. But you can do some weird glitches with this thing, just like with the game handler controller. And the game handler review is coming soon. And that's pretty much all I have to say about the controller. It is responsive and it works just fine. And you can use this or the Super Nintendo controller. Now, let's get on with some gameplay. But before I actually show you the gameplay, I do want to tell you that the RetroDuo actually sent mixed feeds of video quality, which means that the video quality might not be like it is on the TV. So that's all I really wanted to tell you. Let's show you some gameplay. Now for this part of the gameplay, I'm going to show you what it looks like through composite and hooked up to a TV, because it has different mixtures of signals when you're connecting it to either a TV or a VCR or a DVD recorder. So I'm going to show you what it looks like on a TV. So this is the only way to actually show you on a TV. We're going to do composite first. This is an NES game. Going to show you Ghosts and Goblins first. And as you can see, the picture quality is actually pretty good for composite on the NES. So now I'm going to show you Gauntlet, the unlicensed cart, since Gauntlet is known for not working on clone. So I don't think I have the game all the way in. Sorry about that, folks. And as you can see, it works just fine on the RetroDuo. Now I do want to mention that the sound is off on the NES portion of the RetroDuo. Now that can be fixed with a simple mod. The sound is off on certain games without this mod. So if you want it to sound perfectly, you may want to actually do the mod technique. It's online. You can find it online, and it should help with the sound of the NES part of the RetroDuo. Now we're going to try the Super Nintendo portion of the RetroDuo using composite. I have in here Super R-Type. Unfortunately, sometimes it doesn't want to work. Some games don't work right away on the RetroDuo, unfortunately. But it looks good in composite. It really does. The sound is great. There's no problems with the sound on the Super Nintendo portion of the RetroDuo. Sounds just fine. And it looks pretty nice. So now we're going to try a Super Famicom game now. I heard that the Super Famicom games actually work on here. This is Super Bomberman 2. and it plays just fine. So, and by the way, Famicom games will work on this if you're playing the NES portion of the RetroDuo, but you'll need a converter for that. Super Famicom games, however, you don't need a converter to actually play Super Famicom games. Now I heard that it's not supposed to work with all Super Famicom games, but most games it does work. So now I'm going to show you S-Video on the RetroDuo. First, the Super Nintendo portion. Or Super Famicom portion if you like. You can use Super Famicom for this demonstration as well. And as you can see, picture quality is almost identical to the Super Nintendo or Super Famicom for S-Video, since they allowed for S-Video too. I don't think this is quite as sharp as the Super Nintendo or Super Famicom on S-Video, but it's pretty close. I will say that the picture quality is still great, and I definitely do like S-Video on the Super Nintendo portion of the RetroDuo. Now for the NES part, when you use an S-Video on a TV, it does not look quite as good as on the Super Nintendo portion of the RetroDuo when you're using S-Video. It looks all liney and stuff, and it doesn't look quite as good on a TV, unfortunately. So if you're going to use S-Video on a regular TV when playing the RetroDuo, I recommend that you use the Super Nintendo for S-Video, since the NES portion of S-Video on a regular TV isn't as good. So now, before I get to my final thoughts on this system and if I think you should buy it, I do want to talk about one thing about this. And if you're trying to record game footage, and here's what I recommend. If you're trying to record game footage on a DVD recorder, I recommend that you track down the original systems if you don't have them, because the picture quality using the DVD recorder on them actually looks just fine. Now, I do want to tell you that the picture quality on the Super Nintendo portion of the RetroDuo using S-Video on a DVD recorder actually looks fine. But if you're trying composite or S-Video with NES, or composite with Super NES with this thing, the picture quality looks like crap. So that's all I really wanted to tell you about that. That's the one huge flaw I have with this system. Now, on to my final thoughts. Now, should you actually buy this? Well, it's up to you. If you don't want the actual systems, then this is great. If you have any NES games or Super NES games and you don't want to get the original systems, you just want something altogether, like a 2-in-1 system, this is for you, definitely, because you can play your NES and Super NES games on there. Not every single NES game or Super NES game will work. There are some compatibility issues, and it even says on the box that it does not work with all games. Yeah, and I found this out for sure. There are some compatibility issues, and by the way, I forgot to mention that this is region free, so you can possibly play every single NES or Super NES game that ever existed around the world, except there are some compatibility issues with certain games from other regions, so you may want to check to see if that game's going to work. Okay? Another flaw with this system is the fact that you can't use your NES controllers or NES Zapper or PowerPad. They simply will not work unless you have adapters for them. That's unfortunate because I wish there would have been connections for NES controllers on the RetroDuo. That would have been nice for sure if it was something like the Retron 3, where there were hookups for the NES, Super NES, and Genesis. And that's a 3-in-1 system that allows you to use your Sega Genesis, Super NES, or NES controllers. That would have been nice if the RetroDuo had that. Unfortunately, that doesn't. You have to buy adapters for your NES controllers or NES Zap or PowerPad to get them to work on here. Another flaw, I should say, is the way the RetroDuo sends mixed feeds to either the TV or VHS to DVD recorder. It depends on where you're hooking up your RetroDuo. I talked about that earlier, and I could say that's another flaw. I wish this would have performed flawlessly on a VHS to DVD recorder, but it kind of didn't, and I wish it would have performed properly. I wish it would have, fortunately. And another thing is this has sound issues, but they can easily be fixed because I've heard there are modifications for your RetroDuo to have adequate sound. That way the games will sound much better. Fortunately, I have not modified my RetroDuo yet. I might actually get somebody to modify mine because unfortunately I don't know how to do that stuff. I don't know how to solder or anything like that. It requires soldering. But with the modification, the RetroDuo, for the NES part that is, the NES part has sound issues, not the Super Nintendo. With the modification, the NES part in terms of sound quality should sound much better than an unmodified RetroDuo. Oh, by the way, another flaw I forgot to mention is that the Super Nintendo part sometimes has glitches, and that's another flaw I forgot to mention. And that's pretty much it for the flaws. Now the pros are for this system is the fact that it pretty much plays a lot of the NES and Super Nintendo games for sure. Definitely well worth it if you're trying to track down a clone system that actually works. And another thing, the Super Nintendo part of this is actually perfect, especially with S-Video for sure. It's just like the Super Nintendo hardware for sure. So in terms of clone system, this is definitely worth getting, even though I recommend you using a TV for this rather than using a VHS to DVD recorder, unless you're actually recording either a DVD of your video game footage or a VHS tape. It doesn't really matter. But remember what I said. Please use these tips that I talked about earlier. Okay? That way you'll be able to do proper VHS and DVD records of gameplay from the RetroDuo. My final verdict on this is it's an awesome clone system. I highly recommend it. It is definitely worth getting just in case you want to play more NES or Super NES games that you couldn't with other clone systems. This is definitely well worth it. Hopefully there'll be definitely an improvement, hopefully in the near future. And that's really all I gotta say about the RetroDuo. Highly recommend it. Definitely worth getting if you want a 2-in-1 system that plays NES and Super Nintendo games. Now the last thing I will point out with the RetroDuo is, do I prefer this over the actual systems? No, because the actual systems were built much better. You can play all the games, even though it's not every single region. You'll have to actually buy other Nintendo or Super Nintendos in order to play all region games. It depends. Sometimes you can modify your NES or Super NES, but either you'll need adapters, or it depends on the game itself. You'll either need adapters or modifications to actually play certain games. But this over the official hardware, it's a no. But for a clone system, this is definitely worth getting. But I still like the original systems, don't get me wrong. And that's pretty much my review in a nutshell. So I hope you enjoyed it. And there's going to be more reviews on the way. So peace out. Happy gaming.